Marilyn Brooks moved with a quiet efficiency that made her almost invisible. Her hands, worn but steady, wiped down a marble-topped table, her plain gray apron a stark contrast to the glittering sea of wealth around her. She was surrounded by designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of privileged conversation. To them, she was just a part of the background, a shadow meant to serve and disappear. But what no one at this lavish wedding knew was that the woman they ignored, the woman wiping away their spills, was about to own the very ground they stood on. The moment of injustice arrived like a thunderclap on a clear day. Kyle Henderson, the head of security, strutted through the venue with the arrogance of a man who believed his uniform made him a king. He spotted Marilyn refilling a crystal water jug near the main wedding arch, a space he deemed a VIP zone. He sneered, his lip curling in disgust. He humiliated her, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, calling her just the hired help. He ordered 2 of his guards to kick her out, to remove the blemish from his perfect, polished event. But what Kyle Henderson didn't know was that Marilyn wasn't just a caterer. She was the CEO and owner of a $220 million event property investment firm. And in a matter of minutes, a drone would descend from the sky, dropping a contract that proved she had just bought the entire wedding property. Before we find out what happens next, tell us in the comments. Have you ever seen someone get humiliated just because they looked poor? And hit that like button if you already feel karma coming. Kyle Henderson's eyes, small and hard, scanned the pristine lawn of the estate. He saw perfection everywhere. The perfectly arranged white roses, the perfectly dressed guests, the perfectly chilled champagne. Then his eyes landed on Marilyn Brooks, and his perfect picture was ruined. She was standing near the floral archway, a place reserved for the bride and groom's photos, a place he considered sacred ground for the wealthy. She was simply refilling a water dispenser, a task that was part of her job, but to Kyle, her presence in that specific spot was an unforgivable intrusion. He saw her gray apron, not as a uniform of service, but as a stain on the landscape of luxury. He marched toward her, his heavy boots crunching on the manicured grass. His posture was aggressive, his shoulders thrown back, his chin jutting out. This was a man who derived his sense of importance from diminishing others. He stopped a few feet from Marilyn, close enough for his voice to carry, but far enough to maintain a sense of superiority. "Hey, you!" he barked, not bothering to learn her name. "What do you think you're doing?" Marilyn looked up, her expression unreadable. She had faced men like Kyle her entire life, men who saw her clothes before they saw her character, men who measured a person's worth by the weight of their wallet. She calmly placed the lid back on the water jug. "I'm refilling the water for the guests," she said, her voice even and low. Kyle let out a short, ugly laugh. "This is a VIP zone, for guests only, not for the help." He gestured dismissively at her apron. "That thing you're wearing, it means you stay in the service areas, out of sight. Is that too complicated for you to understand?" His voice was a razor, sharp and cutting. Heads began to turn. The soft murmur of conversation started to quiet as guests, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama, began to watch. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. "What's going on over there?" One woman in a silk dress murmured to her husband. "Looks like the help is in trouble," he replied with a bored smile. They saw it not as a moment of human cruelty, but as a minor piece of entertainment. Kyle saw the attention and savored it. He felt his power swell with every pair of eyes that turned his way. He was the protector of this exclusive world, the gatekeeper who kept the undesirables out. He pointed a thick finger at Marilyn. "I want you out of this area, now." He then looked over his shoulder and snapped his fingers at 2 of his security guards who stood awkwardly by the entrance. "Get her out of here. Escort her off the property." The guards, both young men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, started to move forward. They shuffled their feet, their eyes avoiding Marilyn's. They were just following orders, but the shame of it was a heavy weight. Nearby, a young waiter named Ethan Ward froze. He was holding a tray of champagne flutes, and his hand trembled slightly, making the glasses clink together. He saw the coldness in Kyle's eyes and the quiet dignity in Marilyn's. It felt wrong. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to say something, to intervene. But he was just a temp worker. He needed this job. He stayed silent, a knot of guilt tightening in his stomach. Marilyn didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply looked Kyle directly in the eye, her gaze steady and unnervingly calm. All the whispers, all the stares, they didn't seem to touch her. She stood in the eye of a storm of her own making, a storm she had yet to unleash. In that moment of intense public scrutiny, she asked a simple, quiet question that hung in the air like a prophecy. "Are you sure you want to do this?" The question was so unexpected, so devoid of fear, that it momentarily threw Kyle off balance. But his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. He saw her calmness not as strength, but as defiance. And defiance from someone he considered beneath him was something he could not tolerate. He laughed, a loud, braying sound that echoed across the lawn. "Am I sure?" he mocked. "Of course I'm sure." He took a step forward and, with a violent shove, pushed the tray of empty glasses she had been collecting. It clattered to the ground, the sound of shattering glass silencing the last of the whispers. "You're the hired help," he snarled, his face twisted in a mask of contempt. "It's time you learned your place." The broken glass at Marilyn's feet seemed to symbolize the shattered dignity Kyle was trying to impose upon her. But Marilyn's spirit remained whole. She looked down at the mess, then back up at Kyle, and a flicker of something unreadable, pity perhaps, or calculation, passed through her eyes. The guests watched, some with faint smirks of amusement, others with a flicker of discomfort they quickly suppressed. They were witnesses to a public shaming, a raw display of power that made them feel more secure in their own elevated positions. The bride, Isabella Lane, watched from a short distance away, a delicate smile playing on her lips. Dressed in a cascade of white lace and diamonds, she looked like an angel, but her thoughts were anything but pure. She enjoyed this. She enjoyed seeing the clear, unshakable lines of social hierarchy being drawn in front of her guests. She glided over, her dress rustling like fallen leaves. She didn't look at Kyle. She addressed Marilyn directly, her voice dripping with condescension. "He's right, you know," Isabella said, her tone syrupy sweet. "People like you should stay invisible at events like this. Your job is to serve, not to be seen." A man in a nearby group chuckled. "Was she a beggar before this job?" he said to his friends, loud enough for Marilyn to hear. The comment drew a few snickers. The humiliation was now a group activity, a sport for the rich and bored. Each cruel word, each mocking laugh, was a stone thrown at Marilyn. Yet she stood unbowed. Her eyes remained steady, not with anger, but with a chilling kind of observation. She was cataloging every face, every smirk, every word. She was a scientist observing a specimen, a general surveying a battlefield. Kyle, emboldened by the bride's support and the guests' amusement, decided to escalate his attack. He wanted to utterly destroy her. "You know what? You're fired," he declared, puffing out his chest. "I'm telling your catering manager you're done, on the spot." He wasn't finished. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, threatening whisper. "And I'll make sure your final payment gets frozen indefinitely. You'll be lucky to see a single dime for the work you've done today." The threat of withholding pay was a low blow, designed to hit her where he assumed she was most vulnerable. It was a weapon the powerful often used against the powerless. He expected her to beg, to plead, to break down in tears. He craved that reaction. Ethan, the young waiter, felt a surge of nausea. This was too much. He took a half-step forward, his mouth opening to protest. "Sir, she was just—" But then he caught Kyle's venomous glare. The unspoken threat was clear. "Speak up, and you're next." Ethan's courage withered. He thought of his mother, who had worked jobs like this her whole life, who had endured countless silent humiliations to put food on their table. The shame of his own cowardice was a bitter taste in his mouth. He stepped back, lowering his gaze, his face burning. Marilyn finally broke her silence. But she didn't plead. She didn't argue. She simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I see," she said, the words calm and measured. She turned and began to walk away, her steps unhurried. She didn't look like someone who had just been fired and humiliated. She didn't look defeated. She looked like a chess master who had just sacrificed a pawn to set up a checkmate. As she walked toward the service entrance, away from the glittering crowd, her mind was already racing. She was calculating. She was planning. The game had just begun, and they had no idea they weren't even players. They were merely pieces on her board. The image of Marilyn in the gray apron, walking away from the jeering crowd, dissolved into a starkly different scene, a flashback, sharp and clear. Marilyn Brooks was not in an apron. She was in a tailored navy blue suit, standing at the head of a long, polished mahogany boardroom table. The skyline of a major city glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. The air in this room was different. It was charged with power, respect, and the quiet hum of immense wealth. Seated around the table were men and women in expensive suits, their faces a mixture of awe and deference. They were her executive team, her strategists, her legal eagles. And in this room, no one called her the help. They called her Boss Brooks. "The final papers are ready, Ms. Brooks," a man with silver hair said, sliding a thick binder across the table. He was the head of her acquisitions department. "The portfolio includes 12 underperforming event venues across the state, prime real agreements. Total acquisition cost, $220 million. Marilyn picked up a heavy gold-plated pen. She didn't hesitate. She uncapped it, and her signature flowed across the bottom line of the contract, with a confident, practiced motion. The sound of the pen on paper was the only sound in the room, a quiet scratch that sealed a deal worth more than most people earn in a dozen lifetimes. The moment she lifted the pen, a wave of relief and excitement washed over her team. They had been working on this for months. "Congratulations, Boss Brooks," one of them said, and a murmur of agreement went around the table. Marilyn gave a slight nod, her expression serious, but satisfied. One of the properties in that portfolio, a sprawling estate with rolling hills and a historic mansion, was the very venue where in the future she would be serving water in a cheap apron. The ownership transfer was legally set to be recorded and finalized on the day of the wedding at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was all part of her plan. Her son, Lucas, a brilliant young man in his late 20s with his mother's sharp eyes, stood by the window. He was a drone engineer, a tech prodigy who had built his own successful company with his mother's backing. He was also her most trusted confidant. After the meeting, as the executives filed out of the room, Lucas walked over to her. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Going undercover yourself? At every single new property? You don't have to do that anymore." Marilyn looked out the window at the city below. She saw the endless stream of cars, the tiny figures of people rushing along the sidewalks. Each one had a story. Each one was fighting a battle. "Yes, I do, Lucas," she replied, her voice soft but firm. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a deep, unwavering conviction. "I need to see it for myself. I need to know how the people at the very bottom are treated, how the cleaners, the waiters, the security guards are spoken to when the bosses aren't around." She placed a hand on his arm. "Respect isn't what people show you when you're standing in a boardroom signing a $200 million deal. True respect, true character, is revealed when they think you are no one, when they think no one important is watching." She had designed this test for every new property she acquired. She would work a single shift as a low-level employee to take the temperature of the company culture. It was her secret method. her way of diagnosing the sickness of disrespect that often plagued businesses from the inside out. Today was the test for the wedding venue. And so far it was failing spectacularly. Lucas knew better than to argue when his mother had that look in her eyes. He simply nodded. "Okay, Mom, I'll have everything ready. The drone is prepped. The delivery system is tested. Just give me the signal." Marilyn smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit up her face. "I will," she promised, "when the time is right." Marilyn's journey from poverty to power was not a fairy tale. It was a gritty, grueling climb built on sleepless nights, relentless work, and an unshakable memory of humiliation. The reason she chose to be invisible, to don the apron and walk among the staff, was rooted deep in her past. Years ago, long before Brooks Capital Holdings was even a dream, Marilyn worked as a janitor in a downtown office building. She was a single mother, mopping floors and cleaning toilets on the graveyard shift to provide for her young son, Lucas. She was invisible then, too. People would walk past her, their eyes sliding right over her as if she were a piece of furniture. They would step on her freshly mopped floors without a word of apology, drop trash just inches from the bin, and talk over her as if she couldn't hear. One night, she was cleaning the executive washroom. It was late, and she was exhausted. The CEO of the company, a man whose name she didn't even know, walked in with a client. He was laughing, telling a story. He didn't acknowledge her presence at all. As he was washing his hands, he looked at her reflection in the mirror, and a look of pure disdain crossed his face. He turned to his client and said with a dismissive wave of his hand, "Don't mind her, she's just the cleaner. The people you hire when you have no other options in life." The words hit Marilyn like a physical blow. Just the cleaner. The phrase echoed in her mind for years. It wasn't the low pay or the hard work that broke her spirit. It was the casual, effortless cruelty of that comment. The assumption that her job defined her entire worth as a human being. In that moment, scrubbing a floor on her hands and knees, a fire was lit within her. It wasn't a fire of anger, but of ambition. She promised herself that one day she wouldn't just work in buildings like this. She would own them. She would own the ground that had once rejected her, and she would build an empire where every single employee, from the CEO to the janitor, was treated with baseline human dignity. That memory was the fuel that powered her through night school, through business courses, through saving every penny to make her first small real estate investment. It was the memory that pushed her to be smarter, work harder, and outmaneuver all the men who underestimated her. Back at the wedding, the sting of Isabella's and Kyle's words was a faint echo of that long-ago insult. But this time, the power dynamic was entirely different. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her apron. She discreetly pulled it out. It was a text from her lawyer, Dalton Reed. The message was short and to the point. "All we need is your signal. Ownership is ready to record. 10 minutes and the wedding land is legally yours." The power to end this charade was literally in the palm of her hand. One word, one text, and Kyle Henderson's world would come crashing down. She looked back across the lawn. She saw Kyle, puffed up and proud, accepting a compliment from a guest, likely for handling the situation. She saw Isabella laughing with her bridesmaids, probably recounting the story of the caterer who didn't know her place. They were so blissfully unaware, so secure in their petty cruelty. A cold, hard resolve settled over Marilyn. It wasn't enough to just win. They needed to understand why they had lost. She typed a simple reply to Dalton Reed. "Not yet." She put the phone back in her pocket. The lesson was not yet complete. Ethan Ward's hands were still shaking as he carried a tray of empty dishes back to the catering tent. The scene with Marilyn and Kyle played over and over in his mind like a movie he couldn't turn off. The sneer on Kyle's face, the cold amusement in the bride's eyes, the quiet, unyielding dignity of the woman in the gray apron. He felt sick, disgusted, not just with them, but with himself. He had stood there and done nothing. He had let his fear win. His own mother had been a maid in wealthy people's houses for 30 years. He remembered all the times she came home, her back aching and her spirit weary, with stories of being treated like she was invisible, of being accused of stealing, of being spoken to like a child, of having to clean up messes left with careless indifference. He had always sworn to himself that he would be different, that he would be the kind of person who spoke up, who defended the underdog. Today, he had failed that test. He sat down on a crate behind the tent, hidden from view, and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the video file. He had started recording instinctually the moment Kyle had raised his voice. It was a habit he'd picked up, documenting things just in case. The entire ugly incident was there. Kyle's shouting, Isabella's smirk, the laughter from the guests, and Marilyn's calm, powerful question. It was all there, a perfect little capsule of casual cruelty. His first thought was to delete it. Getting involved could cost him this job and maybe future ones. The event industry was a small world. But then he thought of Marilyn's face, the strength in her eyes. She hadn't been defeated. She had been watching. It was as if she knew something no one else did. He replayed the video, the volume turned down low. He watched Kyle push the tray of glasses. He watched Isabella deliver her poisonous line. He felt the anger rise in him again, hot and righteous. Deleting the video felt like being complicit. It felt like siding with the bullies. He couldn't do it. He wouldn't. He closed the video player, his decision made. He would keep it. He didn't know why or what he would do with it. But he knew he had to hold on to this piece of the truth. He looked out from behind the tent at the wedding party, a world of glittering facades and rotten cores. He whispered to himself, a question born of pure, baffled curiosity. Who is she? Really? Meanwhile, Kyle Henderson was in his element. He was basking in the glow of his own perceived authority. He stood with a small group of his security guards near the edge of the marquee, recounting his triumph. He was loud, his voice full of self-congratulation, ensuring any guests nearby could overhear his story of maintaining order. "You should have seen her," he bragged, a wide grin on his face. "I kicked that caterer trash right out of here. Some people just don't get it. They beg for tips and think that gives them the right to wander wherever they please. They think they matter." One of the younger guards nodded along, trying to look impressed. "Good job, boss." Showed her who's in charge. Kyle clapped him on the shoulder. "Exactly. You have to be firm with these people. Give them an inch, and they'll think they're a guest. It's about maintaining standards." A short distance away, Isabella was having a similar conversation with her bridesmaids. They were gathered near the champagne fountain, their laughter like the tinkling of tiny, sharp bells. "Oh my God, did you see that woman's face?" one of the bridesmaids said, taking a delicate sip of her drink. Isabella laughed, a sound that was pretty on the surface, but held an undercurrent of malice. "The beggar in an apron? I know. It was priceless. Some people are just so clueless. Imagine thinking you belong anywhere near the wedding arch. It's just embarrassing for everyone." They all laughed together, united in their shared sense of superiority. The brief, ugly incident had become a fun little story for them, a minor anecdote to spice up the day. They had already forgotten Marilyn's face, remembering only the role she played in their little drama, the lowly servant put back in her place. They were all blissfully cocooned in their world of wealth and entitlement, completely unaware that a storm was gathering just over the horizon. They couldn't know that their words were being judged, their actions recorded. They couldn't know that the foundation of their perfect day was about to crack. Back behind the catering tent, Ethan's mind was racing. Keeping the video wasn't enough. Doing nothing with it felt just as cowardly as not recording it at all. He felt a desperate need to get it to someone, to show someone what had happened. But who? The catering manager was a timid man who would never dare to cross the security chief. The wedding planner was only concerned with keeping the bride happy. Then an idea sparked in his mind. When he had first been hired for the temp job, he had been given an orientation packet. In it was a list of emergency contacts for the venue management company. He had glanced at it once and tossed it in his locker. He quickly retrieved the crumpled paper. He scanned the list of phone numbers, and one line caught his eye. For serious staff grievances or legal issues, contact Brooks Capital Legal Team. He had no idea who Brooks Capital was, but the words legal team sounded serious. It sounded like someone who wouldn't be intimidated by a bully like Kyle Henderson. With trembling fingers, he composed a new message. He attached the video file. The recipient was the unknown number listed on the paper. He hesitated for only a second, then hit send. As the small progress bar showed the video uploading, he felt a strange sense of relief. He had no idea what would happen, or if anyone would even see it. But he had done something. He had sent a signal out into the void, a small flare of truth, hoping someone, somewhere, would catch it. Kyle Henderson's feeling of triumph began to sour into irritation. A few minutes after his grand confrontation, he saw her again. Marilyn. She wasn't serving or cleaning. She was standing near the catering trucks at the far edge of the property, speaking quietly and authoritatively to a group of other catering staff. They were listening to her intently, nodding at her instructions. From his vantage point, it didn't look like a fired employee being debriefed. It looked like a general giving orders to her troops. The sight filled him with a fresh wave of rage. The audacity! He had fired her. He had ordered her off the property. And yet, there she was, still on site, acting as if she had every right to be there. His authority had been defied, and in his world, that was the ultimate sin. He grabbed his radio from his belt, his knuckles white. He pressed the button to talk, his voice a low growl that crackled over the airwaves. "All units, this is Henderson. The caterer I ejected is still on the premises by the service entrance. Shut her down. I want her gone. Now." He saw one of his guards approach Marilyn and the group. The guard spoke to her, and Marilyn simply turned and looked at him, her expression unconcerned. She said something to the guard, who then hesitated, looking confused. The guard spoke into his own radio, his voice a tinny squawk that Kyle couldn't make out. This was infuriating. His orders were not being followed with the speed and efficiency he demanded. "I don't care what she says," Kyle barked into his radio. "Cut her company's final payment. I want them to feel this. I want her to be begging for work next week." His arrogance was reaching its peak. He felt untouchable, a feudal lord on his own small patch of land. To him, this wasn't just about one disobedient caterer anymore. It was about making an example of her. He wanted to crush her, and the company she worked for so completely that no one would ever dare to question him again. He strutted over to the wedding planner, a flustered woman with a clipboard pressed to her chest. "I want the name of that catering company," he demanded. "I'm personally going to call the board of event owners first thing Monday morning. I'm going to have them blacklisted nationwide. They'll never work another wedding, another gala, another corporate event in this country again. Their reputation will be ruined." The wedding planner looked at him, her eyes wide with alarm. This was an extreme reaction. "Kyle, are you sure? It was just a minor—" "It was not minor," he snapped, cutting her off. "It was a complete breakdown of protocol, a total lack of respect, and it will be dealt with." He was high on his own power, completely blind to the fact that he was threatening to blacklist a company with the owner of the company that was about to own him. He was a man standing in a hole, angrily demanding a bigger shovel, digging his own professional grave deeper and deeper with every word he spoke. He was so certain of his power, so sure of his place in the world, that the thought he could be wrong never even entered his mind. The pre-dinner toast began. The father of the bride gave a tearful, heartfelt speech. The best man told a few funny, slightly inappropriate stories. Then, it was the bride's turn. Isabella stood up, holding her champagne flute, a radiant smile fixed on her face. She thanked her parents, her new husband, and all the guests for sharing in her perfect day. The speech was sweet, elegant, and exactly what everyone expected. But then, she went off script. Her eyes scanned the crowd and landed on the edge of the property, where Marilyn was quietly observing from a distance. A cruel, knowing smirk touched Isabella's lips. "And I'd also like to thank the staff," she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "It takes so much work to put on an event like this. And it's so important that everyone knows their place and does their job quietly, in the background." She paused for effect, letting the words hang in the air. She then looked directly toward Marilyn, making sure their eyes met across the lawn. Because there's nothing worse than people pretending to be more than they are. It's a valuable lesson for all of us, isn't it? To be happy with what you are, even if you're just the help. A wave of uncomfortable tittering and a few outright laughs spread through the guests who understood the reference. They were in on the joke. It was their final public twisting of the knife. It was a clear, targeted message, designed to be the final nail in the coffin of Marilyn's dignity. Kyle Henderson, standing near the back, grinned broadly. He felt a sense of vindication. The bride herself was on his side. He had done the right thing. Marilyn stood perfectly still. She heard every word. She saw the smirk. She felt the collective gaze of the crowd upon her. But she felt no shame. She felt no anger. All she felt was a profound sense of clarity. This was the moment. This was the final piece of data she needed. She had seen the true character of this place and the people in it. The test was over. The results were in. As the guests raised their glasses to toast Isabella's cutting remark, Marilyn's phone buzzed in her pocket one last time. It was another text message, this one from her son, Lucas. It contained a satellite image of the estate with a small red dot hovering just out of sight. The message beneath it was simple. "Drone in position, contract team ready, waiting for your signal." Marilyn looked up at the perfect cloudless blue sky. She took a deep breath. Then, with a calm and steady hand, she reached for her phone. The time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. Marilyn stepped away from the edge of the event, finding a quiet spot behind a row of manicured hedges that shielded her from the prying eyes of the wedding guests. She held her phone in her hand, the screen glowing with the message from her son. She could hear the faint sound of music starting up, the happy chatter of the party continuing on, completely oblivious. For them, the drama was over. For Marilyn, it was just beginning. She took one last look at the scene. She saw Kyle standing tall and proud, the king of his little castle. She saw Isabella, laughing and accepting kisses on the cheek, the beautiful, cruel princess. They were so confident, so secure. They believed they had won. A grim, determined look settled on Marilyn's face. She pressed the call button on her phone. It rang only once before Lucas answered, his voice crisp and alert. "Mom?" Marilyn didn't waste a single word on pleasantries. Her voice was cold, clear, and absolute. "Time," she said. That was all Lucas needed to hear. On the other end of the line, in a discreetly parked command van a mile away, he nodded to his co-pilot. "We are a go. Launch sequence initiated." His fingers danced across a keyboard, and on a large monitor, a live video feed flickered to life. It showed a sleek, black quadcopter drone rising silently into the air from a hidden clearing in the woods bordering the estate. Attached to its underside was a small, secure compartment. Inside that compartment, nestled in a waterproof sealed legal envelope, was a document that was about to change everything. "Drone is airborne and approaching the target coordinates," Lucas said, his voice calm and professional. He was tracking its progress on his screen, a green dot moving steadily across a map of the property. "Flight path is clear. Wind speed is nominal. Estimated time to arrival, 90 seconds. "Good," Marilyn said. She looked up at the sky, her eyes scanning for the first sign of its approach. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. The golden hour light made the whole scene look like a perfect painting that was about to be irrevocably altered. She ended the call without another word, and slipped the phone back into her apron pocket. She straightened her back, squared her shoulders, and prepared to watch the show. The first sign that something was amiss was a low humming sound. It was faint at first, barely audible over the music and the laughter, like the buzz of a distant insect. But it grew steadily louder, more persistent. A few guests glanced up, their brows furrowed in mild confusion. They scanned the clear evening sky, looking for the source of the noise. Then they saw it. A small, dark shape, moving swiftly and purposefully above the trees. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't a plane. It was a drone. And it was heading directly for the center of the wedding reception. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "What is that?" someone asked. "Is that part of the wedding? Maybe for photos?" another suggested. But the drone wasn't carrying a camera. It was carrying a small, sleek package. Kyle Henderson saw it, and his face instantly hardened. A drone was an unauthorized aerial vehicle, a security breach, a threat. His mind raced through the possibilities. Was it paparazzi, a protest, a prank? Whatever it was an intrusion on his watch, and it was unacceptable. He grabbed his radio, his voice sharp with urgency. "Unauthorized drone over the main, lawn, I want it down, now," he yelled. "Does anyone have a visual? Can we jam its signal?" His guards looked up at the sky, helpless. They were event security, trained to handle rowdy guests, not airborne intruders. "Boss, we don't have any anti-drone equipment," one of them radioed back, his voice tinged with panic. Kyle's face turned red with frustration. "Then shoot it down. I don't care. Use whatever you have to. Get it out of the sky," he bellowed, his voice cracking with rage. He sounded unhinged, his carefully constructed composure crumbling in the face of this unexpected challenge. But his orders were useless. His guards had nothing to shoot it with, and the drone was too high, too fast. The drone didn't waver. It continued on its programmed path, the humming growing louder until it was directly over the center of the white-tented reception area. It hovered there for a moment, a dark, mechanical bird suspended against the golden sky. The music had stopped. All conversation had ceased. Every single guest, every staff member stood frozen, their necks craned, their eyes fixed on the strange object above them. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then a small compartment on the underside of the drone opened. A single sealed legal envelope was released. It didn't flutter randomly in the wind. It fell with a deliberate, calculated trajectory, weighted perfectly to drop straight down. It tumbled through the air, end over end, a white rectangle against the blue sky, a message from an unseen power. It landed with a soft, almost silent thud, right in the middle of the pristine white carpet that served as the aisle, just a few feet from the bride and groom's lavishly decorated table. The drone, its mission accomplished, banked sharply and sped away, disappearing over the trees as quickly and silently as it had arrived. For a long moment, nobody moved. The guests stared at the envelope lying on the carpet as if it were a bomb. There was a profound, unnatural silence. The idyllic scene of the wedding had been shattered. A mystery had literally fallen from the sky, and no one knew what it meant. Just as the stunned silence began to break, as whispers of, "What was that?" and "Who sent it?" started to ripple through the crowd, a new presence made itself known. A sleek black car, which had been parked discreetly on the service road, pulled up to the edge of the lawn. The back door opened, and a man in an impeccably tailored dark gray suit stepped out. He was tall, with silver hair and an air of calm, unshakable authority. This was Dalton Reed, Marilyn's lawyer. He was followed by two assistants, a man and a woman, both carrying leather briefcases. They moved with a synchronized, professional purpose that immediately commanded attention. Dalton Reed walked calmly onto the lawn, his expensive shoes making no sound on the soft grass. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the bride. He walked directly to the white envelope, bent down smoothly, and picked it up. He held it up for a moment, then turned to face the crowd. His voice when he spoke was not loud, but it carried across the entire space with the clear, resonant tone of a man used to being listened to in boardrooms and courtrooms. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his expression neutral. "My apologies for the interruption." He paused, letting the weight of his presence settle. "My name is Dalton Reed, and I am the Chief Legal Counsel for Brooks Capital Holdings." The name meant nothing to most of the people there, but its powerful corporate sound made them listen more closely. He gestured with the envelope toward the sprawling estate around them, the mansion, the gardens, the rolling hills. "I have been authorized to make a formal announcement." He let his eyes sweep over the crowd, finally landing on Kyle Henderson, who was staring at him with a mixture of fury and confusion. "As of 5:03 p.m. today, per a previously executed transfer agreement, the full ownership and title for this entire venue, including the main house and all surrounding land, has been legally transferred and recorded." He paused again, a master of timing. He let the implications of his words sink in. The current owners, an elderly couple who had been sitting at the main table, looked at each other in bewilderment. They had sold the property, yes, but the final transfer wasn't supposed to be announced like this. Dalton Reed raised his voice slightly, ensuring every single person could hear the next part clearly. "This property is now under new management, effective immediately. It is now the sole and legal property of Brooks Capital Holdings." Kyle Henderson finally found his voice. He stormed forward, his face a mask of outrage. "What is this? Who are you? You can't just interrupt a private event. I am the head of security here, and I demand you tell me what's going on," he blustered. Dalton Reed looked at Kyle with an expression of mild disinterest, as if looking at a mildly annoying insect. "You are the head of security," he corrected him calmly. He then opened the envelope and took out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a copy of the final page of the deed transfer. He held it out for Kyle to see. "Perhaps this will clarify things for you." Kyle snatched the contract from Dalton's hand. His eyes scanned the dense legal text, full of phrases and clauses he didn't understand. He was looking for a flaw, a trick, a loophole. He was a man drowning, desperately searching for something to cling to. He let out a scoffing, incredulous laugh. "Brooks Capital Holdings? I've never even heard of them. This is a joke, some kind of stupid prank." His eyes continued down the page, searching for the name of the CEO, the new owner he would have to report to. He found it at the bottom, just above the signature line. The print was clear and simple. Owner, Marilyn Elise Brooks. For a split second, the name didn't register. It was just a name. Then, a terrible, sickening wave of recognition washed over him. Marilyn, the caterer, the woman in the apron, the woman he had screamed at, fired, and threatened, the woman he had called hired help and trash. The world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from Kyle's face, leaving it a sickly, pale gray. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. The paper trembled in his hand. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by a choking gasp. He read the name again, and then a third time, his eyes wide with dawning horror. It was impossible. It couldn't be real. But the official seal of the county clerk was stamped right there in bright blue ink. It was very, very real. A chilling stillness fell over the entire wedding party. The guests who were close enough to see the paper, or who had heard Kyle read the name aloud in a choked whisper, were frozen in disbelief. The news spread through the crowd like a shockwave in hushed, frantic whispers. What did it say? Brooks. Marilyn Brooks. The caterer? No, it can't be. Ethan, the young waiter, stood near the catering tent, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen the name on the contact sheet, Brooks Capital. Now it all clicked into place with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. He stared at the spot where Marilyn had been standing, his mouth hanging open in sheer, unadulterated shock. The woman he had felt pity for, the woman he had tried and failed to defend, was the most powerful person here. Isabella's perfect smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of pale, horrified confusion. Her fairy tale wedding had just turned into a nightmare. She looked from the lawyer to the contract in Kyle's trembling hand, and then her eyes darted around, searching for the woman in the apron. The beggar. The help. The woman who was, apparently, her new landlord. The entire foundation of her world, a world built on the idea that people like Marilyn were insignificant, had just crumbled into dust. The silence that hung over the lawn was absolute, broken only by the sound of the contract slipping from Kyle Henderson's numb fingers and fluttering to the ground. At that exact moment, a figure emerged from the shadows of the service entrance and began to walk toward the center of the lawn. The crowd parted instinctively, a silent sea of shocked faces clearing a path. It was Marilyn Brooks. But she was not the same woman they had seen before. The plain gray apron was gone. In its place, she wore a sharp, exquisitely tailored power suit, the same deep navy she had worn in the boardroom. Her hair, which had been tied back in a simple, functional bun, was now styled elegantly. She walked with a confidence and purpose that was utterly magnetic. She was no longer Marilyn the caterer. She was Boss Brooks, the CEO, the owner, the queen who had returned to claim her castle. Every eye was fixed on her. Jaws dropped. Guests, who had smirked at her just an hour ago, now stared in stunned, fearful silence. They were seeing a ghost, a magic trick, a complete inversion of the reality they thought they understood. She didn't look at any of them. Her gaze was fixed on one person, and one person only. Kyle Henderson. She stopped directly in front of him. He looked like a statue, frozen in a posture of pure shock, his face ashen. Marilyn looked down at the contract lying on the ground at his feet, then back up at his face. Her expression was not triumphant or angry. It was cold, calm, and businesslike. She was an executive handling an unpleasant personnel issue. She spoke, her voice carrying the same quiet authority as Dalton Reed's, but with a personal cutting edge. "You wanted me removed from the property," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a reminder of his own words thrown back in his face. She paused, letting the full weight of the situation crush him. "As it turns out," she continued, her voice dropping a fraction, "you were trying to remove me from my own property." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. The last shred of doubt vanished. This was real. This was happening. The caterer they had mocked, the woman they had dismissed as nothing, owned everything. Kyle finally seemed to snap out of his stupor. He took a staggering step backward, as if physically pushed by the force of her words. His mind was a whirlwind of denial and panic. No, this is a mistake," he stammered, his voice a pathetic, reedy whisper. You're a caterer." Marilyn gave a small, humorless smile. "Today I was. It was an educational experience. I learned a great deal about your management style." The finality in her voice was like a guillotine blade falling. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely and violently reversed. The man who held all the power was now utterly powerless. The woman, who had been treated as less than human, now held his entire future in her hands. And everyone was watching. Marilyn's gaze was unwavering. She looked Kyle Henderson in the eye, and for the first time he saw not the meek servant he had imagined, but the formidable tycoon she truly was. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Everyone waited to see what the new owner would do. Marilyn took a breath and delivered the sentence. "As the new owner of this property," she began, her voice ringing out with absolute clarity, "my first official act is a matter of staffing. Kyle Henderson," she said, her eyes locking onto his, "I am terminating your employment and the contract of your entire security firm, effective immediately. You're fired." The words were simple, direct, and devastating. Isabella let out a small, sharp gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. This was her wedding day, and the security chief had just been fired in front of all her guests by a woman she had personally insulted. The humiliation was now hers. Kyle's face crumpled. The arrogance, the pride, the aggression. It all melted away, replaced by raw, desperate panic. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Ms. Brooks, I didn't know. It was a misunderstanding. I was just doing my job." "No," Marilyn corrected him calmly. "You were not doing your job. Your job is to provide security and treat all individuals on this property with professionalism. What you did was abuse your power to humiliate someone you thought was beneath you. That is not a misunderstanding. It is a failure of character. Now, I want you and your team off my property within the next 15 minutes. Dalton Reed's two assistants stepped forward, their expressions firm, ready to escort Kyle away. The reign of King Kyle was officially over. Marilyn then turned her attention, her gaze sweeping over the crowd until it found the young waiter, Ethan. He was standing frozen by a table, his eyes wide as saucers. He looked terrified, as if he expected to be fired next for his association with her. Marilyn's expression softened slightly. She beckoned him forward with a small gesture. Hesitantly, Ethan walked toward her, his legs feeling like jelly. He stopped a few feet away, his head bowed. "Ma'am, Miss Brooks, I'm so sorry," he stammered. "There is nothing for you to be sorry for," Marilyn said, her voice kind but firm. She turned to Dalton. "My legal team received a video file about an hour ago. It documented the incident quite clearly. It was sent from this young man's phone." She looked back at Ethan. "You recorded everything, didn't you?" Ethan's head snapped up in shock. He nodded numbly. Yes, ma'am." "Good," Marilyn said. "In my companies, we value integrity. We value people who are willing to do the right thing even when it's difficult." She gave him a small, approving smile. "As of this moment, you are no longer a temporary waiter. I'm creating a new position for you. You are now the head of staff relations for this venue. And your first task will be to help me build a culture of respect from the ground up. We'll start by tripling your pay." Ethan stared at her, utterly speechless. His life had just been changed in the span of 30 seconds. Triple pay? Head of staff relations? He couldn't process it. A wave of elation and disbelief washed over him. The guests, who had been whispering amongst themselves, now fell silent again, their minds reeling from this latest development. The whispers changed in tone. "She's a millionaire," one person murmured. "With a portfolio this size? Try billionaire," another corrected. The woman they had laughed at was not just rich. She was a force of nature, capable of destroying one man's career and making another's with just a few sentences. They were all recalibrating, their minds scrambling to catch up with this new, astonishing reality. The wedding did not stop. Marilyn, in a surprising act of grace, allowed it to continue. But everything was different. A new security team, professional and courteous, was brought in from one of her other properties. The catering staff, who had been on the verge of being cheated out of their pay, were now treated with a newfound, almost fearful respect by the guests. They moved with a renewed sense of pride, their heads held a little higher. Marilyn did not stay to celebrate. The party was not hers. She walked the grounds, her tailored suit a stark contrast to the festive attire of the guests. She walked past the rose gardens, their scent sweet in the evening air. She walked by the shimmering lake, the setting sun painting the water in shades of orange and purple. This was all hers now. The land, the trees, the grand old house. She had conquered it not with an army, but with a quiet resolve and an unshakable belief in her own worth. She thought back to that night, so many years ago, on her hands and knees scrubbing a floor. She remembered the sting of the CEO's casual cruelty. He had called her just the cleaner. Today, Kyle had called her just the hired help. The words were different, but the sentiment was the same. The belief that a person's uniform defines their value. But they were wrong. They were all so terribly wrong. Some uniforms are a disguise, some are a test. Never mock someone in a uniform because you never know the power that lies beneath it. Some uniforms hide millionaires who are testing the soul of their new investment. Some aprons belong to owners, quietly watching to see who is worthy of being a part of their world. Respect is the only property that truly matters, and those who fail to give it will eventually find they have nothing at all. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.